Thanks very much, everybody. Helen talked about the skeleton. What I've learned over these many years is that it's hardest to see what is most obvious. And what is most obvious is our community. The skeleton is the community. And what I want to just spend a couple of minutes talking about is a way I've come to understand that if we have a threatening and disruptive event, it's going to not only have a massive impact on ourselves as individuals and families, but across the whole community. And there is a community dynamic that is quite predictable, although the way in which it happens will be varied according to the circumstance in the community. But the fundamental phenomena are driven by the biology of threat. So if we start off by just picturing a community as a structure, like a crystal lattice, you could say, where we are grouped together in combinations with people that we feel in one dimension we've got something in common with, such as locality, and then there's another dimension where we have political views or religious ideals or occupational interests or sporting, whatever. And in each of those we feel ourselves to be intimately connected with other groups of people. So you've got this is just showing one dimension, but if you imagine this is a multi-dimensional structure that we don't ever have to think about as long as it's relatively stable and we've got clear communicational methods of engaging. And that allows there to be a combination of similarities and differences, of closeness and distance, because we've got a complexity of relationships. Just imagine, is there anybody that you enjoy having dinner with as long as you never talk politics? You just talk local wines or something like that? So it just shows, doesn't it, we live with these twists around them. Now, this is the air we breathe. This is the water that the fish swims in. The fish doesn't know anything about water because it's never been out of it. We don't know what it's like to be out of community. All psychology assumes an intact community. I just want to give you this one picture of these Indian people rescuing a woman from a cinema fire. And if you look at the faces, you can see these absolutely predictable characteristics of adrenaline, which is the narrow tunnelling of attention, the ignoring of the periphery, the focus on the threat issue. In this case, it's I've got to get out this door. And if you look at their connectedness to each other, you can immediately see they have very little awareness of each other except around that task. You can see that there is enormous energy being generated by this adrenaline. And if you look at their faces, you can see this blank, intense, but unemotionally expressive face, showing what we know from the biology of adrenaline, that the whole feedback system to the self and the body is shut down. They're just focused out there in this narrow window of their goals. Now, if you imagine what will happen if you say to these people, you can't go through here, we've just washed the floors. They're going to explode in rage, aren't they? So what you see is there's a relationship where if that energy can't be produced in action, it's going to feed back and convert into emotion. But what you can see is that in this moment, they've dropped out of their community structure. Can you see that? And I call this debonding. And if you imagine this happens in a whole community, doesn't mean they'll panic and do crazy things like in the Hollywood movies. They will all go into a very narrow, goal-directed activity. But it's the research will show and the anecdotes will show people do much the same whether they are with their nearest and dearest or someone they've never seen before. It's fundamental human values that come into play. And this debonding means there's a temporary loss of this skeleton. this fabric of social relationships. None of it matters. If you look at the multicoloured dots on one side of the fire front, on the other side they're all the same because they've all been through a massive life-threatening experience. And the experience is we suddenly realise it's only life that's important. Now, that's unsustainable, that state of debonding. So as soon as we come out of it, we must rebond. But we're going to rebond in a state of extreme high arousal, narrow focus. When we're in adrenaline, we can't think of complex abstract ideas. It's all about the concrete reality of you're here and I'm here and this has to be done and we have to do this. And what's more, there is the feeling we've all had this huge experience and we feel a sense of oneness. I call this the state of fusion. Instead of having a complex crystal lattice, for a short time, we're a plum pudding. Everyone's doing everything. And truckloads of donated goods are coming in that we don't know what to do with. And people are trying to do everything they can at once. And the communication system is no longer regulated. Everyone's talking about everything, except only talking about the disaster. And everything is highly emotionally aroused. Now, I'm putting it in very simplistic terms. Now, that is unsustainable for long-term life. And the real task of recovery is how do we get from the fusion to a new crystal structure that we can all find a place in? Because the illusion there is we're all one. But what's going to happen is that as time passes, we're going to find out actually nobody had the same disaster. Nobody's house means to them what somebody else's house means to them. So everybody's house lost is different. And then we're going to find out you're insured and I'm not. You lost your house, I didn't. I was here and fought the house and saved my and feel totally traumatised. You evacuated early, lost everything and aren't traumatised in that way, and so on and so forth. And it gets incredibly complicated. And so what this threatens to do in a highly charged, highly emotional, welded together group is create tensions. And so the task is how do we get from this to the crystal lattice? We've got to differentiate. And if we don't differentiate constructively, then we're going to encounter this kind of situation where people go into the numb, shut down, chronic stress scenario. That's the psychology of adrenaline rather than, of cortisol rather than adrenaline. You can see the loss of connection there. And what starts to open up is what I call cleavage planes. The anger, the blame, the judgments around differences create splits and tensions in the community. And this is absolutely predictable. If you go into fusion and you can't manage the fusion, we're going to get cleavages. The task that we're here to deal with is how do we form a temporary organisation in that fusion to start to re-establish not the old structures necessarily, but structures that look to a new future, because probably most people's lives and most communities can't go back to what they were. In that sense, the word recovery is a bit of a misnomer. We need to rebuild a new, viable, creative, productive community. But you can't do creative thinking when you're in adrenaline. So the most important thing is to get out of that arousal state, slow things down, take time. This is where community-based organisations are the only way that we can give enough feedback to governments with enough sensitivity to find out what we need. We don't do well if somebody else tells us what we need. So what I'll be talking about in my session is some of the broad strategies and techniques we can think of in managing these dynamics as they unfold. Thank you.